my office because she was answering questions out of order the other day. So, that's being passed around. Take all you want. Okay, we're here for a hearing on HB 2294, and Charles is going to review what the bill does, and he's got an emotional support from Jesse today in case there are some questions. Reviser Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to quick go through just the sections of the bill sort of as an outline, and then Reviser Jesse is here, who is our child care expert and also the author of the bill, so she'll be able to answer questions that you might have if I can't. So HB 2294, it modifies and places into statute a number of regulations governing daycare centers. It sets up a whole new regime administered by a new Kansas Office for Early Childhood, and a number of changes to licensing regulations that are brought into statute. So the first section, effective July 1st, 2025, sets out training requirements for child care centers and temporary permit holders. And there are a number of sections here at the beginning of the bill that, where there's one section that is effective July 1st, 2025, and then immediately followed by a section that's effective July 1, 2026, and replaces references to the executive director with references to the Secretary of Health and Environment with references to the executive director of the Office of Early Childhood. So Section 2 does that. It basically just changes Section 1 to refer to the executive director. Section 1 pertains to education and training requirements for program directors, also lead teachers and assistant teachers. Section 3 pertains to professional development training for persons that provide child care and child care homes, not child care centers, and just lays out some requirements for training for those persons. Section 4, again, just makes that section applicable to the executive director. Section 5 requires that child care centers, we're back to child care centers, have a full-time program director. If it's licensed for more than 75 children, it has to have an administrator. So it sets out some requirements for administration. Section 6, again, is just that same section with references to the executive director. Child care provisions pertaining to fire, water, sewage disposal, square footage per child requirements, one can find those in Section 7. It basically provides that a child care center must meet fire protection, water supply, and sewage disposal requirements of the local jurisdiction, and also a minimum of 28 square feet of floor space. Section 8, again, just repeats that section with references to the executive director. Licensees of child care homes are not required to live in a child care home. That provision is in Section 9. Section 10 repeats that as previously noted. Section 11 provides the Secretary can waive any requirements of the Act for a set period of time upon request by a daycare facility licensee. Section 12 makes that applicable to the executive director. Section 13 sets out a pilot program for daycare facilities or youth development programs. It allows the Secretary to develop and operate that pilot program and basically permit the waiver of rules and regulations that would otherwise apply. The child care, the facility, though, would have to follow, alternative rules and regulations that the Secretary might set out or requirements. And then this program would work for up to 5 years. And if the Secretary determines the pilot program is successful, then the Secretary would adopt rules and regulations based on that successful pilot program, and the applicant could operate for an additional 2 years. Section 14, again, just amends that section to reference the Executive Director and the Office of Early Childhood. There's a Section 15 that prohibits restrictions on the use of 15-passenger vans. Section 16, again, just does that for the Executive Director. Section 17 establishes the new Kansas Office of Early Childhood, and it provides for an appointment of an Executive Director subject to Senate confirmation. And also outline, this section also sets up the timeline for that office. The office is to begin transitioning operations after July 1, 2025. Then by January 1, 2026, the governor is to appoint the director and transition programs assigned to the office. And then finally, by July 1st, 2026, all programs are to be under the supervision of the executive director. Section 18 sets out certain responsibilities of that office. Section 19 charges the executive director with a number of duties. Section 20 directs the executive director to exercise duties and functions pursuant to the Act, including appointing employees as necessary and certain specified directors for specified divisions of the Office of Early Childhood. And those are 4 different directions that are set out in Section 20 and 21. Section 22 and through 43 are effective July 1st, 2026. They established the regulatory framework for daycare licensing to be implemented and overseen by the Kansas Office of Early Childhood. Section 22 pertains to, basically specifies that unless the Act specifies otherwise, existing rules and regulations, orders, and directors of state agencies of programs transferred to the Office of Early Childhood would continue to be effective. Section 23 provides that it's unlawful to maintain a daycare facility for children under 16 without a license or temporary permit from the executive director. Section 24 says a number of definitions for purposes of the new regime under the Office of the Executive Director, sections 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 through 45. So these definitions include definitions for child care center, child care home, daycare facility, assistant teacher, lead teacher, program director, infant, school age, unit, and youth development program. Sections 25 and some of the following sections set out licensing provisions and requirements to be administered by the executive director. There's an exemption from licensing requirements for youth development or school-age programs within a public recreation or school. That's set out in Section 40. There's also another exemption that's set out in Section 46. Section 44 requires the executive director to establish an online information dissemination system and adopt rules and regulations for that. Section 45 provides that to the extent funds expended for child care services are subject to federal requirements and appropriation acts, such funds shall not be expended by any agency to reimburse providers for unfilled child care slots. Section 46 pertains to youth development programs and school-age programs operated in a public or private school. Again, like Section 40, that provides certain exceptions for those programs. And Section 46 requires the premises to be governed by a memorandum of understanding concerning school inspections between the state fire marshal and the local political or taxing subdivision. Sections 47 through 48, amend statutes pertaining to the Advisory Committee on Children and Families to form a new Children's Cabinet. So the Kansas Children's Cabinet is set out in sections 47 and 48. Section 49 provides an amendment to the current expedited licensing statute for military service members and non-residents. It amends that provision to ensure that licensing of individuals by the Secretary of Health and Environment would be covered by the Act, and also the statute is amended to reference licenses issued by the Executive Director. Section 50, 51, 52 through 59 all pertain to amendments to existing child care facility licensing statutes. Section 50 amends the definition section. And important definitions there include foreign assistant teacher, boarding school, child care center, child care facility, child care home, child care resource and referral agency, child placement agency, daycare facility, infant, lead teacher, program director, school age unit, youth development program. Section 5 amends that section, Section 50, to remove definitions, certain references to child care centers, daycare facilities, and child care resource and referral agency, and also youth development program. Sections 52 through 59 amend the existing licensing provisions pertaining to child care facilities, and also strikes references to daycare facilities throughout those sections to remove such duties of daycare licensing from KDHE and transfer the duties to the Office of Early Childhood, and also not to conflict with new sections in the Act. Drop-in programs are now referenced as youth development programs in Section 58. That amends certain definitions to include that change in terminology. And Section 59 makes some changes pertaining to a statute that deals with immunization records. The parent education program is addressed in sections 60 through 64. The Department of Education is struck as the administering entity, and the Kansas Office of Early Childhood takes its place. One other change I might mention is that there was a tax credit, I believe, that was in the bill from last year, and that is not in this current bill. So that is sort of an outline of what the bill does.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you did a great job. Any questions for the reviser, Representative Penn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Charles. That was an excellent job. You were talking about Section 49, and I just want some clarification of that language. I know we've talked about it maybe in committee on other bills. It talks about licensing, registration, or certification for, quote, military service persons and persons intending to establish residency in Kansas. How is that defined? Is it with military orders? How do we define intending to establish residency, sir?
Yes, Representative. So the bill actually doesn't change the existing statute with reflect to that, with reference to that at all. So I don't know. I mean, I want to answer your question, so just to make sure that I'm on the same page with you. So what the bill does is just removes a reference to a specific statute that potentially could have, created some confusion with respect to KDHE licensing, and also it adds a specific reference to the executive director to make sure that licenses issued by the executive director would be covered. Now, having said that, does that answer your question or not really?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it does. You're saying that this was language that was removed out, so it's not necessarily pertinent to it? I was just kind of zeroing in on the intending to establish residency, just trying to figure out exactly what does that mean. That's all.
Okay.
I think he's just saying it's current law.
Yeah, that's what that's what I'm saying.
All right, any further questions? Charles, other than the one thing that you mentioned on the tax credit, is there anything else that's different in this bill than what came out of conference committee last year?
So I'll try and mention just a couple things that I know of, and then maybe Revisor Jesse would be able to follow up with a more detailed answer. So I think one difference is the reference to youth development centers, is it? No, I can't remember, but that replaces references to, I think, drop-in centers, if I remember correctly. And we mentioned the tax credit is out. There are some minor changes, you know, for example, some of the numbers with respect to, you know, when certain requirements apply, like, for example, when one needs a director in a daycare, in a child care center, those numbers changed a little bit, some of those things. But I think I'd better refer to Revisor.
Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the most notable things that you may remember from the bill last year is the drop-in programs were proposed to be called youth out of school time. So it's no longer youth out of school time that you heard last year, and it is that youth development program that Charles mentioned. Some of the statutes have been updated just simply because they were amended last year. And then there's a new section following the establishment of the early childhood that does a lot of transfers from existing agencies. So if the programs are coming from KDHE or some other agency, this section allows them to transfer those employees and their benefits to the new agency. It allows them to transfer the budget to the new agency and make that clean transition. These items and transfers are commonly found in executive reorganization order, so all that language is pretty standard and consistent with those transfers.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, seeing no further questions, Charles. Thank you very much. We'll start with our oral proponents. And first up is none other than the Senator Tori Marie Blue. Welcome back to Commerce Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This was my favorite committee I got to serve on for 1 year. Great to be back to talk to you guys about childcare. Many of you know this is something that I'm very, very passionate on. This looks like a lot. It's 71 pages. And so what I encourage you to do is, if you want to know the layman's terms, I put it in my testimony, and it is the conference committee report brief, the links in there for House Bill to Sub-House Bill to Sub-House Bill to Sub-House Bill to 96 that we did last year. And so this explains what's in the bill in the layman's terms and what the definitions are. There's a ton of definitions in this. But the other thing I want to direct you guys to is to understand all the moving parts and what this new office is. I encourage you to look at the next conferee's testimony, Zach Vincent, and he put in his testimony the flow chart so you can see exactly what we're talking about and how this is just a mess. Our current system, people have to go all over the place, and we need to be more efficient, and we need to have better access for our providers, for our parents, for everybody in the state of Kansas. So the one thing that many of us heard when we were out campaigning and knocking doors and just talking to our constituents is childcare, access to childcare, affordable childcare. And I think this bill is the great first step for it. I look forward to hopefully getting this across the finish line. I think that communities are really struggling across the state of Kansas. This isn't just a Kansas issue. This isn't a rural issue. This isn't an urban issue. This is an every community issue. You know, we hear a lot about affordable housing, high quality paying jobs, and childcare, and it's kind of a three-legged stool to make sure that a community grows and continues to be prosperous. And so I think let's go ahead and let's tackle the first one and let's get childcare going. So I am not going to belabor. I think that you guys had a really great overview of what's in the bill. I can answer any questions. I also do have Commerce Committee on the Senate side right now, so I don't know if I can answer questions now or you guys can direct them to the experts behind me.
Thanks, Senator. And can you refresh us? What was the vote out of the House on the conference committee report?
I'm thinking it was 110 to 10. It was very bipartisan.
That's what I thought. Okay. Any questions for the senator? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to leave the mic on for the future folks. I don't have to hit it.
That's against the rules in our committee. You got to turn it off. I'm just kidding. All right, next up, we've got Zach Vincent. Or-
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you and present proponent testimony in support of HB 2294. As the Senator mentioned, my name is Zach Vincent. I serve as the Director of Governmental Affairs and Education Policy in the Governor's Office. I appear before you today on behalf of the Governor, but my testimony also represents the sentiments of our entire administration, including the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Department for Children and Families, and the Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. Each of them have submitted written testimony for you to review on their agency-specific impacts of this legislation, but for sake of efficiency, we wanted to provide a unified verbal testimony before you today. As you all heard on Thursday, our state's early childhood system is incredibly complex, with a variety of state agencies engaging on various programs and providers being forced to navigate a bureaucratic maze to operate. After years of listening to Kansans across the state and working with stakeholders, it's become clear that our early childhood system is not meeting the moment. That system places burdens on providers, communities, and businesses who are looking to the state to better support them in expanding access to care. It requires our agencies to coordinate efforts, often leading to duplication of work and inefficiencies. It prevents accountability and a holistic accounting of the state's work and funding of our early childhood programs. And it leads to uneven enforcement of standards and regulatory structures that limit the ability for providers to care for children and for families to access that care. We cannot fully solve our child care crisis with a system beleaguered by inefficiencies and bureaucratic structures that prevent the state from effectively partnering with businesses and providers to expand access and cut costs. The bill before you today represents a bipartisan compromise between our administration and members of both chambers of the legislature. It's the culmination of years of effort by stakeholders and policymakers alike to expand access to high-quality early childhood care and education opportunities. As the Senator mentioned, the bill, a mirror version of this legislation passed the House last session 110-10, but was not taken up by the Senate. I won't rehash the details that you all have already heard, but I would like to take a few moments to explain how elements of this bill will have positive impacts for Kansas families and our economy as a whole. First, the bill streamlines licensure and regulatory processes for child care providers by updating and codifying professional qualification regulations, which expand the number of workforce pathways to become a provider and advance in one's career. It eases requirements for continuing education, eliminates licensing fees, and provides more regulatory flexibility. It allows for the creation of new licensure categories through pilot programs, expanding the number of slots across the state. It exempts programs like the Boys and Girls Clubs from duplicative inspections, which you heard about earlier. And it adds requirements for surveyors to be trained and certified, ensuring a more consistent application of regulatory and legal standards. Second, the bill consolidates governance of 20 early childhood programs into the Office of Early Childhood. This will create greater government efficiency, streamline administrative processes, and increase government accountability for these programs and their funding sources. The proposal before you is agency neutral. Under the bill, the functions of the Children's Cabinet will become a subset of the office's operations, effectively replacing the cabinet as a state agency as it is today. It only requires the addition of one new FTE, the executive director of the office, who will provide the administrative oversight of the agency. It does not propose the expansion of any state program or increase funding for those programs. It simply reorganizes existing state functions. It does not provide the state any new power or oversight, given all these functions currently exist across our multiple agencies. The office would employ between 80 and 85 full-time equivalents, of which, like I said, one would be new. And the office would oversee a budget of roughly $240 million in ongoing funds, the vast majority of those funds being federal and the state's share of the tobacco settlement dollars that the Children's Cabinet currently oversees. Through these two main elements, we believe that this bill will ensure children and families have better access to care, allow the state to better support providers regardless of their program type, whether it's home-based, center-based, faith-based, or private, and provide communities and businesses a willing partner at the state to solve child care crises or child care challenges. While I know you'll consider many bills this year, I would argue that HB 2294 is one of the most consequential for economic growth and increasing government efficiency. If passed, this bill will cut red tape, increase accountability, improve the quality of care, and allow more Kansans to join and remain in the workforce. Additionally, this bill represents what is the best of what makes us Kansans, our ability to work together to solve challenges. If you ask anyone involved, there are elements of this bill that they like more than others. But the essence of compromise is the willingness to give a little to get a little. While no piece of legislation is perfect, this bill is an example of how we can all better serve Kansans, leaders from both sides of the aisle coming together to address real policy issues through collaboration, good faith negotiation, and compromise. I urge you to support HB 2294, and I'm willing to stand for questions at the appropriate time, including any questions that you may have for the state agencies. Thank you.
Okay, great. So is there any questions for Zach? All right, thank you, sir. Next up, Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Jason Watkins, welcome back to Commerce Committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jason Watkins appearing for the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'll be pretty quick. We were not involved in the drafting, design, compromise of this bill, but we did want to be on record in support. I've joked over the last few years that as a Chamber of Commerce lobbyist, I didn't think I'd be appearing before committees to talk about childcare. But it really has become a huge issue. In our most recent survey that we did of our membership, we asked the question, in your experience, does access to affordable childcare or the lack thereof create workforce challenges in Kansas? And 86.73% came back and said yes. 13% apparently don't have kids and don't know anybody that does. That's a big number. Our chamber's very diverse. It's tough to get them to agree on hardly anything. This really was something that they all agreed on. And we hear about it a lot. We hear about it from our employers. We hear about it from their employees. I mentioned in my testimony, and I've been before this committee many, many times, and it's a recurring theme. We're talking workforce. We desperately need workforce. And this committee and others in the legislature have done a great job over the years of trying to address that need for a trained and qualified workforce. In fact, you've spent literally billions of dollars over the last several years on everything to do with training and education. Everything from K through 12 to your Regents institutions, to tech training, certificate programs, so on and so on. It's a lot of money. When you have Kansans that have gone through that educational process that you have spent that money on, and they can't enter the workforce because of childcare issues, the state has stranded capital. It's not a good thing for a government. It's not a good thing for a business. What is in this bill, I think, helps unstrand some of that capital. And while, Mr. Chairman, we're always concerned about workforce as a Chamber of Commerce, we also want to see every citizen in this state be able to participate in the American dream, to go out and pursue happiness, pursue the creation of wealth. Again, going back to those people that have done everything right. They stayed out of trouble, they went to school, they got an education, they want to go down that path of a professional career. They've got one problem. They decided to have kids. And although they've done everything right, they can't pursue the American dream because they can't afford childcare or they can't find childcare. When you think about that, that creates extreme difficulties for folks. If you don't have a job, it's difficult to pay the rent. It's difficult to put food on the table. It's almost impossible to save money so that you can send your children to school at some point. And I say in my testimony, government doesn't owe anybody a job, but government should do whatever they can to reduce barriers so that people can be successful. And we believe this bill, for many reasons, does that. And I'll close with this. If you reduce regulation and you reduce the cost of regulation, you will help reduce the cost of childcare. You'll also create more competition. So this bill does exactly what we're looking for in terms of trying to move down the road towards having more accessible and affordable childcare. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
All right, committee questions. All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Next up, William Welk, Kansas Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is William Wilkes, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate the opportunity to provide proponent testimony on House Bill 2294, a bill focusing on child care reform. As you've heard, this bill is a comprehensive package to address the critical need of child care in our state. The lack of access to quality and affordable child care has been an issue of concern to the business community for several years now. And we applaud the legislature's efforts to continue to look at solutions with deregulation and just combining services. In November, we conduct a poll every year that includes 300 CEOs across the state of Kansas, ranging from small to large businesses across all industries in Kansas. And we have asked the question, does child care keep Kansans out of the workforce? This year, 69% of the CEOs answered yes. We have continued to see this answer increase every year we have asked this question. Among several great regulatory aspects within this bill, one piece we would like to highlight is on page 19, new section 24, A6B, line 28, that definition of daycare facility to not include an individual who provides care for less than 35 hours per week to 4 or fewer children, not more than 2 infants who are not related to the individual by blood, marriage, or legal adoption. We would like to point out that why put a cap on 35 hours for this? In talking with some stakeholders, I think last year how the 35 hours came up was if you cap it at 40 hours, there's some regulations that could come into effect with it. But ultimately, we believe that parents will decide what is best for their children, and given that the average work week is 40 hours, we would just like to see some concerns addressed. I mean, we're happy if it stays at 35 hours, but just wanted to highlight that point for the committee. In closing, the Kansas Chamber supports any reasonable deregulation of child care facilities when it comes to the accessibility while not sacrificing any of the safety concerns for the children. And on that, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
All right, committee, any questions for the chamber? Seeing none. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, and I think they're online, and hopefully it works this time, Child Care Aware of Kansas.
Hello, this is Christy Smith. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you this time.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to virtually testify as a proponent today. And just wanted to call out a few things. Child Care Aware of Kansas is a state network child care resource referral. And one of the things that many people have shared is it is an economic issue. So obviously we need a robust childcare system, and it really benefits everyone. Families, our professionals, local economies. Reliable childcare can help families remain employed, and it strengthens that workforce, which is obviously what others have said as well. And more importantly, it stimulates that economic growth. Investing in early childhood programs yields long-term social and economic returns by ensuring stable care for young children and keeping families and their communities. And currently, our childcare system requires coordination across multiple state agencies, just as Zach said, and y'all should have the flow chart as well. But I wanted to call out something that I feel like we actually had some foresight and we're ready for this next step. So in my testimony, I had written, but maybe something that this might be new to some of you, is that in 2019, Kansas was awarded the Preschool Development Grant. And at that time, we were really looking at coordination of efforts among our partnerships within the Kansas. So more of the nonprofit organizations and those that sponsor and help for kids and families. But out of that came what was called the governance structure for early childhood services. And it started to remove that duplication. So it was in that initial one step getting closer to what y'all are trying to achieve. If you could have had a crystal ball, flash back to 2019 and determine to where you're at, it really is positioning to a good next step for Kansas to create the one office of childcare. So it will take that same effort that we have looked at, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, the All In for Kansas Kids, The strategic plan was aligning that coordination within our partnering organizations. Again, this is just that next step at a state agency level. So I think we're primed in the right position. We fully support it. We would like to take a look at that same number of hours in care. So 35 hours for us is considered a full time. We would love the consideration to drop a little. However, it does not limit our ability to support this proposal. However, 35 hours is a little bit much. We would like to consider a 26-hour week, and then also look at one infant in care during that time. We also would ask that it had been consideration to take a look at the number of professional development hours. So currently we have 16, and dropping it to 10, we asked that maybe there was a proposal in there to meet in the middle at about 12 hours. And other than that, we just appreciate your time to be able to give this testimony, and really excited about the next steps moving forward. And I'll entertain any questions that you may have at this time.
Okay, Representative Shue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the committee's education, there's been a couple discussion on this 35 hours. What's current statute or current regulation?
It's 20. Sorry, Tiffany, you're muted.
Why don't we let the reviser answer that, if possible?
Thank you.
Sure. So there's no limitation or allowance on hours in statute. Whether or not that exists in regulation, I'd have to defer to the agency, since they have the hours and capacity ratios, but none of those ratios nor an hour limitation is established in statute at the moment.
All right, seeing no further questions, I would comment, though, that the product that we have in front of us is the compromise product, and so there's no more real negotiation on meeting in the middle on anything, because this is the middle, according to the parties that were involved at least last year. So just a comment. All right, next up is going to be John Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is John Wilson. I'm the President and CEO of Kansas Action for Children, and we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit children's advocacy organization. And we are happy to be here today to provide proponent testimony on House Bill 2294. And I'm interested in this issue from actually multiple perspectives. I'm a parent of young children. Both of my boys went through child care, both family child care and center-based care. And my youngest is now a part of the Boys and Girls Club program in Lawrence. I'm also the Senate Minority Leader's appointee for the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund, so I have an interest in this bill from that angle. And then at KAC, we are really working to make sure that kids have all that they need to grow up healthy and to thrive. So to improve outcomes for Kansas children, we can't simply focus on the types of programs and services offered and how they're funded. We need to look at how they are organized. Streamlining the governance of our early childhood system by consolidating many early childhood programs into the Office of Early Childhood is an important solution to the challenges faced by parents and providers. High-quality services that are easy for parents to access and providers to navigate will support the healthy development of children. An effective model of governance should create coherence, foster accountability and transparency, and improve quality and accessibility. So by that standard, our current structure is not as effective as it could be. I think there is a conspicuous lack of authority and accountability for child care and early childhood programs when authority and funding are dispersed across multiple agencies. And I think it's really clear that child care providers bear the biggest burden with this current disjointed system. Whether they're starting a new facility or simply trying to keep their business going, they have to navigate multiple state agencies with multiple regulations, each with their own policies and practices. But I think it's also safe to say that this just disjointed and complicated system doesn't just impact providers. As an advocacy organization interested in how the state invests in children, it is incredibly difficult to track spending across multiple state agency budgets, and it's really difficult to provide testimony in multiple committees on the same issue area. And I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. When you want answers, action, and accountability, it can be very frustrating to not know where to find that data. As has been previously mentioned, this bill is a result of multiple rounds of negotiations and truly is a compromise. And as with any compromise, there are issues for which we have some reservations. And these issues, for us, came about as a result of the conference committee process. We all are familiar with conference committees where amendments get added and there is not that time for conferees to talk about those things. So I want to highlight two reservations that we have. The first relates to the Children's Cabinet. The current law provides flexibility in who can be appointed to the Children's Cabinet by legislative leadership. Under House Bill 2294, appointments by the Speaker, the House Majority Leader, the House Minority Leader, the Senate President, the Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate Minority Leader must be elected lawmakers. This change removes the flexibility that currently exists and could potentially politicize the cabinet. Additionally, the bill alters the terms of the legislative appointees and could result in high turnover and the loss of cabinet knowledge and expertise. That's the first concern. The second concern is related to unregulated child care. And as you can see from proponent testimony, we each have maybe differing opinions on this particular piece. Some really like it. Some, like Kansas Action for Children, have serious reservations about it. The definition of child care facility on line 26 of page 50 could result in significant expansion of unregulated care and actually jeopardize the health and safety of children. Should this bill be worked, we strongly encourage the committee to either reduce the number of hours per week an individual can provide care or decrease the number of children who can be cared for. Overall, though, the plan to establish the Office of Early Childhood is well researched and the result of nearly a year's worth of stakeholder input and bipartisan discussion. And it's certainly not going to solve every problem that exists and is experienced by providers and parents and communities, but it is a really important first step. So I urge your support of 2294 and would also direct your attention to over 15 pieces of proponent written testimony from local chambers, from advocacy organizations, child care providers, and individuals. I'll stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you. We do have one more oral opponent that just, proponent. Yeah. And I just put their testimony in the S drive, and it is with United We. Come on up. Wendy Doyle. Welcome to Commerce Committee. Sorry for the confusion.
No problem. Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Wendy Doyle. I'm president and CEO of United We. We are a think and do tank, nonpartisan, focused on evidence-based research to advance women's economic development in the state of Kansas. We have submitted written testimony, but a couple of points that we wanted to identify. We have done some qualitative gathering of information around the state of Kansas from women and focus grouped also child care providers. What we heard from Kansas families is that child care is a kitchen table conversation, not only for affordability, but accessibility. And we then focus grouped child care providers just trying to understand some barriers for their work, and then did a big national research study looking at the intersection of women's entrepreneurship and child care. And where we have taken a position is really looking at the child care licensing at both the city, county, and state level in the state of Kansas, looking at some efficiencies. What we are most excited about testifying in support of HB 2294 is creating the Office of Early Childhood, knowing that there can be and will be some efficiencies, not only for parents, but also for providers. This is an economic development opportunity to advance not only women and keeping them in the workforce, and we know that if we do that, that we can grow Kansas' economy by as much as 15%. Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions, and again, in addition to written testimony that was submitted. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Committee, any questions for United We? All right, seeing none, I'm not showing any further oral proponents, or is there a couple more? Come on, two more. Come on up and introduce yourself. Oh, here we go.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 2294. I'm Joyce Glasscock, Executive Director, Kansas Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs. As background, we serve more than 14,000 school-age children at over 70 program sites in Kansas. We provide programs during out of school time. That includes before and after school, in-service days, spring break, and all-day summer. Clubs are currently licensed as drop-in programs. We do support current bill language changing that drop-in program title to Youth Development Program to reflect actual practice at clubs. The definition of drop-in suggests that youth come and go at their own volition, and that is not the practice at licensed boys and girls clubs. We offer 4 amendments. Regarding Amendments 1 and 2, we would like and recommend inserting language in new Section 40 that eliminates duplicative fire inspections for school-based program sites where schools have already undergone a fire inspection. And number 2, we recommend deleting irrelevant language in new Section 46, which is addressed in other language. We have 2 additional amendments that would remove language in lines 32 and 66, defining child that includes an individual up through 18 years of age with an individual program plan. We are comfortable with the language defined as child going up through and only through age 17. And we're speaking to that specifically because in previous years' language to this effort, we had asked that up through and including age 18 be included. We have now stepped away from that, and according to KDHE, that is more consistent with federal law regarding the definition of child. I have no other comments, but would be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, committee, any questions? Boys and girls? Nope, see none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer Bruning, YMCA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bruning, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Kansas State Alliance of YMCAs. I'm here on behalf of our YMCA Child Care Task Force to provide testimony in support of this bill. The Kansas Alliance of YMCAs is made up of 10 YMCA associations located in more than 25 communities and hundreds of program sites across the state. So we are actually the largest child care provider in the state and feel well equipped to be able to talk about the impact of this bill on all of our programs and facilities and centers. You can see in our testimony how many kids that we serve. 1 in 4 Kansas kids are served by a YMCA in some way across the state. At the YMCA, all of our licensed child care programs strive to provide high quality, affordable, and accessible child care services to families and communities across Kansas with regardless of the ability to pay. These programs not only meet the needs of early learners, ensuring they're prepared academically and socially to enter schools, but also, as our Chamber of Commerce colleagues mentioned, these programs make a significant impact on the economy in Kansas by supporting workforce development. So since our YMCAs actually offer both early learning programs as well and centers as well as school-age programs, we are touched and impacted by almost all of the child care services and programs that are slated to be consolidated by the proposed Office of Early Childhood. We do support this bipartisan effort with this bill to reduce the bureaucracy that we do face on some of these levels, especially and the inefficiencies. So this more streamlined approach will help our wives serve more families and children without facing multiple challenges or barriers. We do also find that the elimination of the annual state licensing fees for child care facilities and programs will be a value add to the child care system. It reduces our financial strain on the Ys as they try to balance costs and obviously keep as high wages as they possibly can. We do, and while we do appreciate the lowering of these licensing fees and the business costs in this manner, we do want to point out that it's actually the local licensing fees, not the state fees, that make up the bulk of each YMCA's annual fee budget. So these local fees are actually costly and subject to annual increase by local contracted agencies, and that just adds to our financial burden. So we also obviously support the facility updates and staff qualifications that have been proposed in this bill. And we also, finally, I want to say that the YMCA's actually support the amendments number 1 and 2 being proposed by the Boys and Girls Clubs, of which Joyce just mentioned here. These make clear that school-age programs and youth development programs operating in schools already in compliance with the fire safety code do not need additional fire inspections. Over the last several years, our Ys have experienced numerous challenges with fire safety inspections imposed by the Kansas Office of the State Fire Marshal, especially with our school-age programs that are hosted within a public or private school building. So while recently the State Fire Marshal and his team have graciously worked with us to implement policy changes to avoid inconsistencies and the duplication of effort and enforcement and all that comes with it, we feel that passing these and putting these amendments into this bill will help us better solidify this as we maneuver through the annual licensing process, and helps kind of ensure consistency should staffing or personnel at the Office of the State Fire Marshal change. So we urge your support on this bill, and I am happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, looks like you're off the hook. Thank you. All right, we have one last proponent testimony from the Johnson County Board of Commissioners. Do we have anybody here for them? Looks written only? Okay, thank you. And that looks like that finishes up proponent testimony. Do we have any neutral testimony? Anybody neutral want to testify? All right. We've got one opponent. Looks like Tiffany from Family Child Care Providers.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to virtually testify. It's a little difficult to get away, so it made it a lot easier to be able to do this today, to do it virtually. I am testifying as an opponent of House Bill 2294. My name is Tiffany Manis, and I've been a child care provider for 22 years. I'm currently the Vice President of the Kansas Child Care Coalition, and I serve as the Kansas State Representative for the National Family Child Care Association. And years ago, I served on the BEST team implementing and editing Lexi's law. The biggest change to this bill from the previous bill is the definition of daycare facility, which would allow 35 hours, as we've already discussed and heard. The current regulation for hours is 20 hours cumulatively, which means if you're caring for one child, 20 hours. If you're caring for two, that's 10 hours per week. So we are multiplying this 7 times if you take the hours cumulatively, which basically allows for unregulated full-time childcare. This is very dangerous because we will have providers in unchecked environments who are not trained caring for children, best case scenario. And worst case scenario, we'll have predators, allowing access predators who do not have background checks to our youngest, most vulnerable citizens. As a licensed provider, I must allow surveyors to enter my home if they knock on the door. If I was not a licensed provider, I don't have to allow entrance to my home. So if there's a complaint, if there's a death, if there's an injury, there's no recourse for unregulated providers, which is very scary for children. I am concerned also about reducing training hours. KDHE just reduced our training hours from 16 to 12 per year. This bill has added a reduction to 10 hours, which I find a little concerning. We haven't really had time to see where we're at with 12 hours. There's also a few other things, but they're not that important. It's the definition of regulated care that is the biggest concern. Now, the positives of the bill, I think it's great to have a one-stop shop and reduce the bureaucracy of all of the agencies. I think it's great to have our surveyors all trained in a consistent manner so that everyone across the state is getting the same answers and the same inspections. And I think it's great to have the option of having pilot programs to open up slots. And I think it's great that they can cut down those excessive school age inspections. However, the way House Bill 2294 is currently written with the 35 hours, it basically just makes unregulated care legal in Kansas. And I don't think that the positives can outweigh the negatives. If this bill passes as written, children will die and we will have to come back and testify again. We cannot undo the good that Lexi's law helped bring to the state of Kansas. Our safety is higher than it was before Lexi's law. This is very dangerous to have unregulated care in Kansas. I'm happy to stand for any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiffany. Do we have any questions from the committee? Looks like we're good. I want to steer the committee's attention to the written-only testimonies that we have in your S drive. Looks like you have a total of 18 proponent written testimonies, 4 neutral, and another written opponent. At this time, we have several folks in the audience that would offer to stand for questions. So if the committee has any questions for some of our previous speakers that have spoken before on this issue, the floor is open. Got one. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would love to have Melissa Rooker back up and ask her some questions about the consolidation process and just walk us through that. I'm looking at the fiscal note and it says that there's a neutral impact and that 2294 would not result in statewide savings as most program duties and responsibilities would be transferred. So it goes on and elaborates, but I wanted to go ahead and make sure I have my numbers correctly. What is the total number of FTE transfers to this new entity?
Ms. Rooker.
So I'm not the author of the bill, and I don't know that I am equipped to answer some of those technical questions. I would defer because I think it's in the bill, but if not, I mean, we're talking about existing programs that are named, and there are staff within each agency. I don't know how many DCF or KDHE staff would be affected, but there will be a transition planning period outlined in the bill and a transition director, somebody neutral to this process who has the kind of experience managing processes like this to oversee that process.
Okay, well, it's relevant to my question because I was going through trying to figure it out. Looking at it, 14 from DCF, and there's 11 support service staff, and there's a 7 mentioned and a 3 mentioned, and a 41 KDHE, and then it said that there would be additional staff that could be hired. So I just was very confusing trying to track it all and to discern its neutrality. So I guess maybe an easier way, well, there's 2 parts to this. To get to that answer of is it really neutral or not, I'd ask, on page 15 of the bill, it has 1 new executive director position, and then it has the director of the Division of Child Care, the director of the Division of Home Visitation, the director of the Division of Head Start, the director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet, which exists today.
Right.
You are that. Are those other director positions already in locations?
Yes.
And so those would just be pulled over?
Yes.
So they would be within the total FTE that may have been mentioned?
Correct.
So do you anticipate any new FTEs?
At this time, the only new FTE contemplated would be the new executive director of the office. My position as director of the Children's Cabinet is one of those you just referenced. The agencies each have director level people that currently oversee the different funding programs that would be pulled over. So this is really about consolidating services.
Okay, and so with that, I guess my question is, I think most of us could agree that some type of consolidation would be great because we've been trying to get after certain numbers and it's very difficult to track. So I think most of us would agree with that. But usually when you think of consolidation, you think of savings. You think of, that you're able to eliminate unnecessary positions because you don't have this duplication of services. But what I'm seeing here is there are no reductions. I'm seeing neutrality at best, but actually it's indicating in the fiscal note that there will be an increase because we know that there's at least going to be probably $175,000 increase with all costs for the director. So that's just one, and it mentions that there would probably be others. So I guess my point is, can you kind of give us an idea why there wouldn't be more efficiencies created by housing it together and working together?
I think we need a chance to identify what those efficiencies are. We know we have multiple agencies funding the same type of services. So you heard about home visiting yesterday. We've talked a lot about childcare. We have multiple state agencies involved, and there's a whole universe of contracts and grants and existing funding directed to external partners and to the components of these systems. What we're asking for is the opportunity to bring this all together so that we can unify the approach to those things and reduce the number of those agreements. We do believe there will be significant efficiency, and there will be an ability to, part of what we want to do is help realign how we approach these services. And so we're talking about FTEs, we're talking about people who are currently operating in silos. We want to come together and we want to streamline how we do business. We want to approach things by making sure that we're covering all of the bases. And so I think today what we're saying is we are only asking for one new FTE, and we are confident that the process of unifying and consolidating these services under one roof will realize better service for Kansans for the programs that are being offered.
Okay, well, I mean, I certainly do appreciate that. I certainly understand trying to maintain jobs and maybe allowing attrition to do its thing, and I certainly understand your desire to want to figure it all out, but I also think that if you're adding one position that's overseeing all of it, it seems like it would be a great first step to at least eliminate a couple other positions in that transition, but that's just me. I guess I am amazed reading this bill that any of us in this room that ever went to daycare were ever raised and can still breathe and function without all of these regulations. Thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Rooker? I would venture to say that once the process starts taking place, they will find efficiencies and redundancies and probably be able to really reduce staff. At least I would hope so. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Rooker. We weren't here, a couple of us were freshmen on this committee, so who does the executive director report to then in this new person?
Well,
You're going to phone a friend on that one?
I am not the author of the bill,
Okay.
so I would defer on this.
Okay, thank you.
I would imagine it's the governor, but Zach, you want to answer that?
Thank you for the question. This would be treated in a way that we treat some other non-cabinet. It's a non-cabinet agency is how the bill outlines it. So it's appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, but it does not serve in the cabinet. It does not directly report to the governor. So there's a level of just non-cabinet independence that's there. Obviously, there's executive functions that exist. So how a governor wants to approach that would be different depending on who that governor is. It would kind of be a similar example of what we have in state government now is the Office of Veterans Services. We changed the name last year, so I'm trying to get the right one, which is a office very similar that's focused on veteran services, but is not a cabinet level agency.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one more question?
Go ahead, Representative King.
Okay, maybe I can ask my question another way. Who would his executive director report to? I'm not sure I really got an answer there, so I'll ask it.
Yeah, this is one of the, I mean, it's appointed by the governor, so there is some level of accountability to the governor as an appointee of the governor, but it is not unique in the way that the state fire marshal is not underneath the governor's office in terms of direct reporting structure or some of these other non-cabinet agencies. So there is a large number of agencies that in this state that the governor may appoint to or appoint to the board of, but they do not report directly up to our office because they are not cabinet level agencies.
Representative, the position is appointed by the governor and serves at the will of the governor. And so the governor would be able to replace that person if they weren't satisfied. But
So which budget, oh, excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr.
I don't want to have to provide candy, so, Mr. Chair. So then, which budget would this fall under then?
I think it's under the office of the governor, but we'll get that answer for you. I'm speaking out of term here, unless the revisor can answer that.
I believe they would be requesting their own budget for starting with fiscal year 27.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's one of the things that I like about the bill, because in appropriations, we didn't talk about child care at all, and we passed a $20-some billion budget the other day. And so this would allow us to take a good look at the budget, because it's in so many different agencies.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm being the general, you can sit down, General Government Budget Chair. Under the office of the governor are many different agencies, and I'm sure it would fit under the office of the governor where they'd have a separate budget inside of the governor's office, the budget. So the other questions I have, and I'm not sure anyone can answer this, but you know, you're trying, I have a problem with the square footage per child in daycare centers. You have increased the number of kids we can have by regulation in all of these 71 pages and other areas, but you haven't even thought about the places that opened with the former square footage of what you needed per child. So they can't have any more kids in their daycare center. They can't, because I believe it used to be 30, and now you went up to 35, and most states are 25 square feet for each child that's in it. So having this moved is great, sounds wonderful. Wanted to know if some of those things could be addressed and could be brought back so that we can talk about them. And then also, what would, you know, there's a pilot program. How much is that going to cost? I don't see anything on that. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll take the first question on the square footage. The bill does reduce that square footage requirement that's currently in regulation down to, so as they said, indoor square footage currently in regulation is 35 square feet per child. The bill takes it down to 28. In outdoor square footage, it's currently in regulation at 75. This takes it down to 60. So I think that should address some of those former facilities, because that would be decreased. So if they were built under the larger square foot regulations, that this should not run afoul of that, is my understanding. We can confirm that and get back to you. And then your second question around pilot programs, we do not believe that there's a fiscal cost of running those types of pilot programs, as is outlined in the bill, because they are pilot programs for new licensure categories. So you heard about from KDHE on Tuesday about the small center pilot. This is kind of the piece of the legislation is to incentivize more of that type of work. The small center pilot is trying to fill a gap in our licensure standards that exist right now. So as a family home provider, you can take up to 12 children under the State Fire Marshal Code. For a center, you have to have at least 24 children. So for communities, especially in our rural communities, there's a gap between a facility that can take 12 kids and 24. And so one thing we've been piloting and will continue to do with this legislation is what does it look like to go into that gap and develop new licensure categories so that we're expanding access to those places for folks who want to take more than 12, but less than 24. So we don't believe there's a huge fiscal cost or any fiscal cost of that at all, just because it is us creating a new licensure category, which we have done previously through regulation, and we've moved from more licensure categories down to the current ones without a fiscal cost to that. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm so sorry, sir. I was going to ask one of my colleagues a quick question about this, and it was down the lines of Representative King. You were stating, and I guess this may be for the revisor or for Zach, Mr. Chairman, when we're talking about the structure and it being kind of independent, if I don't know if the bill speaks to it necessarily, if there are any allegations of misconduct or oversight in that area, I was a little unclear about where do those allegations or complaints arise? Where do they go to if this director in this office is so independent? How does that work necessarily?
Zach, you want to take a stab at that? So your question is if there's a complaint about the department. Okay.
About the department, sorry, Mr. Chair, about the department, not about a provider, just to clarify.
Both and either.
Okay, I'll take about the department. So the executive director would serve at the pleasure of the governor. So upon Senate confirmation, so any of those allegations about misuse of the office can be taken to the governor's office, and the governor then can make a personnel decision as she would with other members of the cabinet or other state agencies that serve at her pleasure. To your second question around misconduct or I'll add on to the misconduct of providers, if I might. The bill doesn't necessarily change the processes around the legal and the licensure elements of that. So as of right now, those types of complaints are provided to KDHE, and KDHE can either remove those, the licensure status of a provider, or refer them to DCF if it is a child neglect situation, or to local law enforcement if there's something. That function would move over to the office upon transition. So that reporting structure for abuse, neglect, or mistreatment wouldn't necessarily change under the provisions of the bill.
All right, any further questions? Okay, last chance. Is there anybody else here that wants to testify as a proponent, opponent, or neutral in person? All right, seeing none. There are several written testimonies, neutral, proponent, and opponent, and they're all in the S drive. And that'll be it on this hearing. We'll close the hearing on HB 2294, and we'll come back on Monday and talk about the land bill that's before us and conferees moving forward. Things have kind of been in flux the last few weeks because we had to switch assistants. And Dell has done one heck of a job catching up, and we are caught up. And so the agenda is out for next week. So we do expect your testimony to come in a timely manner, or we will not hear it. Okay, so let's make it easier on Dell. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks.